The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat across from Sienna Stewart in my oncology office, her face pale with terror as I delivered the words that would change her life forever. "I'm sorry, but we cannot proceed with your treatment at this facility." 10 years ago, this same woman had been my fiancée. My own family had chosen her wedding celebration over my life-threatening cancer surgery. While I lay alone in a hospital bed, preparing for an operation that could have killed me, they were all dancing at her reception, celebrating her new marriage to my former best friend. Today, as Dr. Thompson, head of oncology at one of the most prestigious cancer centers in the country, I held her fate in my hands. The same hands that had once shaken with fear and abandonment in that hospital room were now steady as I closed her file. Sometimes life has a twisted sense of justice, and sometimes the people who abandon you when you're fighting for your life end up needing you to fight for theirs. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we dive into this incredible story of betrayal, transformation, and ultimate justice, let me know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. And if stories of resilience and karma inspire you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow I have something truly special planned for you. My name is Thompson, and 10 years ago, I was just an ordinary graduate student in biochemistry at Northwestern University in Chicago, completely in love with a woman who I thought was my soulmate. I had my whole life mapped out in neat, predictable columns, finished my master's degree in molecular biology, proposed to Sienna Stewart at Christmas, land a research position at a pharmaceutical company, and build the kind of stable, comfortable life that my middle-class family from Bloomington, Indiana, had always valued above all else. Sienna was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. She was brilliant, working toward her degree in marketing at DePaul University with this infectious laugh that could light up any room she entered. We'd met during our junior year at a coffee shop near campus called The Grind, where she was sketching advertising concepts for a class project, and I was cramming for organic chemistry. What started as me offering to buy her coffee turned into 4 hours of conversation that felt like 4 minutes for 3 years. We built what I believed was a solid foundation for marriage. We spent weekends exploring Chicago's museums and neighborhoods, planning future vacations to places like New Zealand and Iceland, talking about the house we'd buy someday in Oak Park with its tree-lined streets and vintage architecture. Fit perfectly into my family gatherings in Bloomington, charming my parents with her interest in my mother's garden and her willingness to help my father with his weekend woodworking projects. But if I'm being honest now, with the clarity that only comes from having your world completely shattered and rebuilt, there were signs I chose to ignore. The way Sienna's attention would drift during our conversations about the future, as if she was listening to someone else's life being planned. How she always seemed slightly restless during family gatherings, checking her phone frequently and making excuses to step outside for calls from friends I'd never met. The subtle way she'd redirect conversations about engagement timelines, it's always suggesting we wait just a little longer for the perfect moment. My family adored her, especially my younger sister Emma, who was planning her own wedding to her college boyfriend, James Patterson. Emma and Sienna had become close during our relationship, spending hours discussing wedding dress styles and venue options. My parents, Robert and Catherine Thompson, treated Sienna like the daughter they'd never had, including her in every holiday, celebration, and family milestone. The Thompson family operated on a foundation of loyalty and tradition that went back generations. My grandfather had been a small-town doctor in rural Indiana, serving the same community for 40 years. My father had followed a different path as a high school principal, but he'd instilled in both Emma and me the same values of service, commitment, and putting family first that had defined our grandfather's legacy. We were the kind of family that never missed a birthday dinner, who planned reunions months in advance, and who showed up for each other no matter what, which is what made what happened next so devastating. In October of 2014, just 2 months before, I'd planned to propose to Sienna with the ring I'd been secretly paying for over 6 months. I started experiencing symptoms that I initially dismissed as stress from graduate school. Persistent fatigue that wasn't helped by sleep, It's a nagging cough that wouldn't respond to over-the-counter medication. It's an occasional chest pain that I attributed to too much caffeine and too many late nights in the lab. Sienna noticed the changes before I was willing to admit them. "Leo, you look exhausted all the time," she said one evening, as we walked through Lincoln Park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. "Maybe you should see a doctor. You've been pushing yourself too hard with your thesis research," he brushed off her concerns with the typical arrogance of a 25-year-old who believed his body was invincible. Graduate school was supposed to be demanding, I told myself. The chest pain was probably just anxiety about my upcoming thesis defense. The fatigue was the price of academic excellence. But when I started coughing up blood during a biochemistry lab session in early November, I could no longer ignore that something was seriously wrong. Dr. Patricia Williams at the Northwestern University Health Center took one look at my symptoms and immediately ordered a chest x-ray that would change the trajectory of my entire life. The mass in my chest was visible even to my untrained eye, a dark shadow lurking behind my ribs, like a storm cloud that had been gathering while I'd been obliviously planning my future. Dr. Williams's expression was carefully neutral. She explained that I'd need immediate further testing, but I could see the concern in her eyes that she was trying to hide. "Leo," she said gently, "I'm going to refer you to an oncologist for a biopsy. I want you to bring someone with you to that appointment, a family member or close friend. This is the kind of situation where you'll want emotional support." The word oncologist hit me like a physical blow. Cancer at 25. When I should have been worried about thesis deadlines and job interviews, I was facing the possibility of a disease that could end everything before my life had really begun. I called Sienna first, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. Her response was everything I needed to hear. Immediate concern, promises to be there for every appointment, reassurances that we'd face whatever was coming together. "We're a team, Leo," she said firmly. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it together." Next, I called my parents, delivering the news that every parent dreads receiving. My mother cried quietly while my father asked practical questions about doctors and treatment options. They promised to drive up from Bloomington immediately, ready to provide whatever support I needed. But even as my family rallied around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of an abyss, looking down into a darkness that would test every relationship and assumption I'd built my life around. I had no way of knowing that the cancer growing in my chest would be nothing compared to the cancer that was about to reveal itself in the people I trusted most. Dr. Michael Harrison at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was the kind of oncologist who delivered life-changing news with the perfect balance of honesty and compassion. His office walls were lined with certificates and awards, but what struck me most was the small collection of thank you cards from patients, handwritten notes of gratitude that spoke to his skill at guiding people through their darkest hours. Sienna sat beside me in the consultation room, her hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel her pulse racing through her fingertips. My parents had driven up from Bloomington the night before and were staying at a hotel near the hospital, but I'd asked them to wait outside during this initial consultation. Some conversations require the intimacy of your closest relationships before they can be shared with family. "Leo," Dr. Harrison began, opening my file with the deliberate care of someone who understood the weight of the words he was about to speak. "The biopsy results confirmed that you have Hodgkin's lymphoma. The good news is that this is one of the most treatable forms of cancer, especially when caught at your stage. The challenging news is that we need to move quickly." The room seemed to tilt slightly as the words sank in. Cancer at 25. When most of my peers were worried about student loans and entry-level job applications, I was facing a disease that could kill me if not treated aggressively and immediately. "What does quickly mean?" Sienna asked, her voice steadier than I felt. "Capable of managing. We need to start chemotherapy within the next 2 weeks, Dr. Harrison explained, pulling up scans on his computer monitor that showed the mass in my chest with clinical clarity. "But first, we need to perform a surgical procedure called a mediastinoscopy to get a better understanding of how the lymphoma has spread. It's a same-day surgery, but it's crucial for staging your cancer properly so we can design the most effective treatment protocol. He clicked through several calendar screens before looking up with an expression that suggested he'd found the earliest possible opening. I can schedule your surgery for Saturday, December 13th. I know that's close to the holidays, but with Hodgkin's lymphoma, time is our most valuable resource. December 13th. The date hit me like a physical blow, and I felt Sienna's hand go rigid in mine. December 13th was exactly 1 week before December 20th. The date that had been circled on every calendar in my family for the past 8 months, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe. To our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Because December 20th was when Sienna Stewart was getting married. Not to me, as I had been planning to propose. To my former roommate and closest friend from undergraduate studies, Jake Morrison. In what had been described to me as a whirlwind romance that had developed over the past 6 months while I'd been buried in graduate research, the breakup had happened in September, just 2 months before my symptoms began manifesting seriously. Sienna had sat me down in our favorite booth at the Grind, the same coffee shop where we'd met, and explained with devastating gentleness that she'd fallen in love with someone else, someone who understood her ambitions better, who shared her vision of success and social advancement in ways that my academic pursuits never could.
Ow.
Leo, you're going to make someone incredibly happy someday, she'd said, her eyes bright with tears that seemed genuine. But Jake and I have something that I've never experienced before. I can't ignore these feelings, and it wouldn't be fair to either of us to pretend otherwise. The betrayal had been crushing, made worse by the fact that Jake had been my closest friend since sophomore year at Indiana University. We'd shared an apartment for 2 years, studied together for the MCAT, before I'd switched to biochemistry, and I'd considered him the brother I'd never had. Learning that he'd been pursuing Sienna behind my back while maintaining our friendship felt like a double amputation of trust. But what had made the situation even more complex was my family's reaction to the news. Instead of rallying around me with righteous anger, they'd responded with what they characterized as mature understanding of romantic relationships that sometimes just don't work out. My mother had even suggested that perhaps Sienna's decision showed emotional honesty that would prevent worse heartbreak down the road. "These things happen, son," my father had said during a long phone call after the breakup. "Sienna's a good person who found herself in a difficult situation. The important thing is that everyone involved handles this with dignity and grace." That dignity and grace had apparently included my entire family accepting invitations to Jake and Sienna's wedding, which was being held at the historic Omni Severin Hotel in downtown Indianapolis. Emma had even agreed to be a bridesmaid, despite my protests that this felt like a betrayal of family loyalty. "Leo, I understand that you're hurt," Emma had explained during a particularly heated phone conversation in October, "but Jake and Sienna are part of our community now. You can't just cut them out of our lives because your relationship didn't work out. That would be petty and small-minded." My parents had echoed this sentiment, emphasizing that the Thompson family had always prided itself on taking the high road in difficult situations. They'd already paid for their hotel rooms in Indianapolis, purchased wedding gifts, and made arrangements to attend what was being described as the social event of the year among our extended friend group now, sitting in Dr. Harrison's office. With the December 13th surgery date hanging in the air between us, I realized that my life-threatening cancer treatment was going to conflict directly with the celebration of my ex-fiancée's marriage to my former best friend. "Doctor," I said slowly, trying to process the implications, "is there any flexibility with that date? December 13th is ... complicated for my family." Dr. Harrison's expression grew more serious. "Leo, I understand that scheduling can be challenging, especially around the holidays, but with Hodgkin's lymphoma, delays can significantly impact treatment outcomes. Every week we wait increases the risk of the cancer spreading to additional lymph nodes." He pulled up additional scans, pointing. 2 areas of concern that looked like dark clouds gathering in my chest cavity. "I've been treating lymphoma for 15 years, and I've learned that the patients who do best are those who prioritize their treatment above everything else, including inconvenient timing and social obligations." Sienna had been unusually quiet. During this exchange, her face pale as she processed the conflict between my surgery date and her wedding date. Finally, she spoke up with a voice that sounded smaller than usual. "Leo, you have to have the surgery on the 13th, she said, though. Her eyes weren't quite meeting mine. Your health is more important than any social event. The irony of receiving this advice from the woman who was marrying my former best friend wasn't lost on me, but I appreciated her clarity in that moment. Of course, the surgery had to take priority. Of course, my family would understand that fighting cancer trumped attending a wedding celebration. I'll need to call my parents and explain the situation, I said to Dr. Harrison. But yes, let's schedule the surgery for December 13th. As we left the hospital that afternoon, walking through the Chicago winter that had arrived early with a vengeance, I felt a strange mixture of terror and relief. The terror was obvious. I was 25 years old and facing cancer surgery. That would determine whether I lived to see my 30th birthday. But the relief was more complex and unexpected. For the first time since Sienna had broken up with me, I had something that commanded absolute priority over everything else in my life. Something that would require my family to choose between their loyalty to me and their social obligations to the people who had betrayed me. I had no doubt which choice they would make. After all, we were the Thompson family, and we'd always put family first, no matter what. How naive I was to believe that some traditions were stronger than social expectations. And the fear of appearing petty or small-minded, how completely I misunderstood the people I'd trusted most in the world. The phone call that shattered my understanding of family loyalty came on a Tuesday evening in late November, exactly 3 weeks before my scheduled surgery. I was sitting in my small graduate student apartment in Evanston, trying to focus on revising my thesis while simultaneously researching everything I could find about Hodgkin's lymphoma, survival rates, and treatment protocols. The apartment felt different now that I knew about the cancer, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer together when I wasn't looking. Every shadow seemed more ominous. Every ache in my body felt like a potential sign that the disease was spreading. But I'd been finding comfort in routine, in the familiar rhythm of academic work that had structured my life for so many years. My phone buzzed with my mother's contact photo, a picture from last Christmas, where she was laughing while wearing the ridiculous reindeer sweater Emma had given her. Normally, my mother's calls were highlights of my week, filled with updates about the neighborhood, questions about my studies, and gentle inquiries about my emotional state following the breakup with Sienna. "Hi, Mom," I answered, grateful for the distraction from the medical journals I'd been obsessively reading. "Leo, honey," she began, and something in her tone immediately put me on alert. There was a careful quality to her voice, the same measured cadence she'd used when I was 12, and she'd had to explain why our family dog wouldn't be coming home from the veterinary hospital. "I wanted to talk to you about December 13th, she continued, and I felt my stomach drop even before she'd finished the sentence. "What about December 13th? I asked, though part of me already knew what was coming. There was a long pause filled with the kind of silence that precedes life-changing announcements. "Leo, your father and I have been discussing the situation, and we're in a very difficult position. We've had these wedding plans for months, the hotel reservations, Emma's bridesmaid dress, the travel arrangements. Everything was set long before we knew about your surgery date." The words hit me like individual physical blows. "Mom, are you saying you're not going to be there for my surgery?" "It's not that simple, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the defensive tone creeping into her voice. "Dr. Harrison said it's a same-day procedure, right? You'll be in and out, and then you'll have plenty of time to recover." Sienna's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. If we miss it, we can never get that back. The logic was so twisted that for a moment I couldn't find words to respond. My mother was comparing my cancer surgery, a procedure that would determine whether I lived or died, to a social event celebrating my ex-fiancée's marriage to the man who had betrayed our friendship. "Mom," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level, "this isn't just any surgery. This is cancer.
How?
I could die on that operating table. "Leo, you're being dramatic," she replied with the kind of firm patience she'd used when I was a teenager trying to get out of family obligations. "Dr. Harrison said Hodgkin's lymphoma is very treatable. You're young and healthy. Surgery is routine for someone like him. But missing Jake and Sienna's wedding would send a message to our entire community that the Thompson family holds grudges and can't move past personal disappointments. Personal disappointments. That's how my mother was characterizing the betrayal. By my fiancé and best friend. And apparently that's how she was characterizing my cancer diagnosis as well. "What about Emma?" I asked, grasping for some hope that at least my sister would prioritize my medical crisis over her bridesmaid duties. "Emma feels terrible about the timing," Mom said, "but she's in the wedding party. She can't just abandon her responsibilities because the dates conflict. Sienna is counting on her, and we raised both of you to honor your commitments." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with my mother explaining the family's position with increasing firmness. They'd already spent money on wedding-related expenses. They'd made promises to attend. Most importantly, they couldn't appear petty or vindictive by choosing sides in what my mother characterized as romantic drama between young adults. "Your father wanted me to remind you," she said near the end of the call, "that we've always taught you and Emma to take the high road in difficult situations. Sometimes being an adult means putting aside personal feelings for the greater good of family relationships and community harmony." After she hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone for what felt like hours. The silence was deafening, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of the support system I'd counted on my entire life. For the first time since my diagnosis, I felt completely alone. The next call came from Emma later that same evening. My sister's voice was bright and artificially cheerful, as if she could somehow minimize the devastation of what our parents had decided through sheer force of optimism. "Leo, I know you're upset about the wedding thing," she began, "but I really think you're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. I mean, lots of people have surgery without their entire families camping out in waiting rooms. Not like the old days where operations were super dangerous." Emma went on to explain that she'd already spent a fortune on her bridesmaid dress, had planned a bachelorette party for Sienna that weekend, and couldn't possibly back out now without ruining everything for the bride. She reminded me that Sienna had specifically requested that she be part of the wedding party, which Emma interpreted as a gesture of friendship and forgiveness that honored our family's commitment to moving past ancient history. Plus, added, Jake's parents are flying in from California, and all our family friends will be there. If the Thompsons are the only ones who don't show up, it'll be super obvious and awkward for everyone. What struck me most about Emma's reasoning was how completely it centered everyone else's comfort and convenience. Sienna's perfect wedding day, Jake's parents' travel plans, our family friends, social expectations. The only person whose comfort and convenience didn't seem to factor into the equation was me, the person facing cancer surgery alone. "Emma," I said finally, "do you understand that I might die during this procedure?" "God, Leo, don't be so morbid," she replied with obvious irritation. "You're not going to die. You're 25 and healthy. This is basically like getting your tonsils out, except more serious. You'll be fine." After Emma hung up, I called my father, hoping that perhaps the man who had taught me about loyalty and family values would see the situation differently. Robert Thompson had always been my hero, a steady, principled educator who dedicated his life to serving his community and raising his children with strong moral foundations. "Son," he said after I'd explained my bewilderment at the family's decision, "I understand that you're scared about the surgery. That's natural, but part of becoming a man is learning that the world doesn't revolve around your personal crises." Went on to explain that attending Jake and Sienna's wedding was about maintaining relationships and demonstrating Christian forgiveness to our broader community. He reminded me that harboring resentment toward people who had moved on with their lives was unhealthy and small-minded. "Your mother and I didn't raise you to be the kind of person who expects his family to boycott social events because of romantic disappointments," he said with the authoritative tone that had ended arguments throughout my childhood. "We raised you to be bigger than that." The phone calls left me reeling, not just from the immediate abandonment, but from the complete reframing of reality that my family had constructed to justify their choice. In their version of events, I was being unreasonable for expecting support. During cancer surgery, I was being petty for feeling betrayed by Jake and Sienna. I was being immature for not understanding the social obligations that trumped medical crises. They'd taken my cancer. Diagnosis the most frightening and vulnerable experience of my life, and somehow made it secondary to a wedding celebration. For the people who had already devastated me once, that night, lay awake, staring at the ceiling of my apartment, processing the reality that on December 13th, while I was unconscious on an operating table having lymph nodes removed from my chest cavity, my entire family would be 200 miles away in Indianapolis, dancing at the reception of my ex-fiancée and former best friend. For the first time since my diagnosis, I cried not from fear of the cancer, but from the deeper, more permanent damage of discovering that the people I'd trusted most in the world considered my life threatening. Medical crisis, less important than avoiding social awkwardness at a wedding celebration. I was completely, utterly alone. And somehow, that realization hurt more than any tumor ever could. The week following those devastating phone calls was when I began to truly understand the depth of my family's betrayal. It wasn't just that they'd chosen a wedding over my surgery. It was the elaborate lengths they'd gone to in order to justify and celebrate that choice, all while minimizing the severity of my medical crisis. I discovered this through social media, that modern window into people's true priorities. Emma had been posting regularly about wedding preparations on her Instagram account. I'd been following out of morbid curiosity about how she was managing the cognitive dissonance of her decision. What I found there was far worse than simple. Neglect. It was active celebration of choosing the wedding over my surgery. Her posts from the weeks following our phone conversations told a story of excitement and anticipation that made my stomach turn. Photos of her bridesmaid dress being altered, captioned, "So excited for Sienna's big day. #bridesmaid life. #wedding countdown." Pictures of herself and my mother shopping for wedding guest outfits at Nordstrom, with my mother beaming in a sophisticated navy dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But the post that truly devastated me was from December 8th, just 5 days before my surgery. It was a group photo taken at what appeared to be Sienna's bachelorette party at a upscale restaurant in Indianapolis. Emma was front and center, arm in arm with my ex-fiancé, both of them laughing with what appeared to be genuine joy. The caption read, "Celebrating our beautiful bride-to-be." Some people say you can't choose your family, but Sienna proves that sometimes the best families are the ones you create. #chosen family. #BACHELORETTE. Vibes. #sisters by choice. The irony of that hashtag. #chose NF family posted while my actual family was abandoning me during the worst crisis of my life was so cruel, it felt intentional. Emma wasn't just attending the bachelorette party. She was embracing Sienna as a sister while I prepared for cancer surgery alone. I scrolled deeper into the family's social media presence and found that my parents had been equally active in celebrating their decision. My father had posted a photo of himself getting a haircut specifically for the wedding, joking about looking sharp for the social event of the year. My mother had shared multiple posts about wedding gift ideas and travel preparations for Indianapolis, treating the event like a long-awaited family vacation. What made this discovery even more painful was the complete absence of any acknowledgement of my medical situation, not a single post asking for prayers for my surgery. No mentions of their son facing cancer treatment, no requests for support or good thoughts during a difficult time for our family. It was as if my cancer diagnosis had never happened, erased from the family narrative in favor of wedding excitement. But the most devastating discovery came when I found my mother's Facebook post from November 30th, just 2 weeks after we'd learned about my surgery date. She'd shared an article about supporting adult children through difficult life transitions with her own commentary that made my blood run cold. Such an important reminder that part of loving our adult children means not enabling their tendency to make everything about themselves during challenging periods. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is maintain normal family functioning and social obligations rather than dropping everything for every crisis. Teaching our kids that life goes on, even during difficult times, is one of the most valuable lessons we can provide. #tough love. Hashtag parenting adults. Hashtag healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries. She had turned my cancer surgery into a parenting opportunity, a chance to teach me that life goes on and that I couldn't expect the world to stop for my crisis. The clinical terminology she used, challenging periods, difficult life, transitions, transformed my potentially fatal disease into what sounded like a bad breakup or a failed job interview. The comments on her post were even more infuriating. Family, friends, and relatives praised her wisdom and balanced approach to parenting adult children. Mrs. Patterson from church wrote, "So true, Catherine. Young people today expect everyone to drop everything for their problems. You're teaching Leo valuable lessons about resilience and independence." My Aunt Linda, my father's sister, had commented, "Proud of you for not being helicopter parents. Leo is strong enough to handle this on his own, and you're showing him that you believe in his strength." They were all congratulating my parents for abandoning me during cancer surgery, framing their neglect as some kind of advanced parenting strategy that would benefit my character development. It was during this period of social media investigation that I received unexpected support from a source I hadn't anticipated. Dr. Harrison's office called to confirm my surgery details and ask about my support system for recovery. When his nurse, Janet Rodriguez, learned that I'd be facing the procedure alone, her professional demeanor shifted to something more personal. "Leo," she said carefully, "I've been working in oncology for 12 years. I've never had a patient face surgery completely without family support. Can you help me understand what's happening here?" I explained the situation, the wedding conflict, my family's decision, their reasoning about social obligations and not enabling my drama. Janet listened in what seemed like increasing disbelief. "Going to be very direct with you," she said finally. "What your family is doing is not normal. In my experience, when someone is facing cancer surgery, their loved ones cancel everything: vacations, work trips, social events, everything to be there for support. The fact that they're choosing a social obligation over your medical crisis suggests something is seriously wrong with their priorities." Janet went on to explain that the hospital had resources for patients without family support, including volunteer companions who could stay with me during surgery and recovery. She also connected me with Dr. Sarah Chen, a social worker who specialized in helping patients navigate family dysfunction during medical crises. My first conversation with Dr. Chen was revelatory. A soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had worked with cancer patients for over a decade. She helped me understand that my family's behavior was not just hurtful, but actually abusive. "Leo," she said during our phone consultation, "what you're describing is a form of medical neglect that we see more often than you might think. Families sometimes abandon members during health crises for various reasons: discomfort with illness, fear of their own mortality, or pre-existing dysfunction that becomes amplified under stress." She explained that my family's elaborate justifications, the social media posts, the reframing of my surgery as a learning opportunity, the emphasis on my supposed selfishness were classic examples of what psychologists call DARVO: deny, attack, and reverse, victim and offender. They're denying the severity of your medical crisis. It's attacking your character for expecting support, reversing the situation to make themselves the victims of your unreasonable demands, Dr. Chen explained. This allows them to maintain their preferred narrative while avoiding the discomfort of acknowledging what they're actually doing to you. Through these conversations with medical professionals who dealt with family dynamics during health crises every day, I began to understand that my situation wasn't just personally painful, it was objectively, measurably abnormal. Families who loved their members didn't abandon them during cancer surgery to attend social events, no matter how important those events seemed. This professional validation gave me something I hadn't expected: permission to be angry. For weeks, I've been questioning whether my expectations were unreasonable, whether I was being selfish for wanting my family's support during surgery. But Dr. Chen and Janet helped me understand that my expectations weren't just reasonable. They were basic human needs that any loving family would naturally want to fulfill. Armed with this new perspective, I began preparing for my surgery with a different kind of strength. Not the desperate hope that my family would change their minds and do the right thing, but the grim determination of someone who had learned exactly where he stood and the priorities of the people who claimed to love him. On December 10th, 3 days before my surgery, I received a text message from Emma that crystallized everything I'd learned about my family's true nature. "Hey, super busy with wedding prep, but wanted you to know we're thinking about you. Surgery will be fine. You're strong. Can't wait to celebrate Sienna and Jake this weekend. Send pics from the hospital if you're feeling up to it." She wanted pictures from my cancer surgery so she could feel better about missing it for wedding festivities. The casual cruelty of that request was so staggering that I finally understood what needed to happen next. I was done hoping they would choose me. I was done trying to make them understand the magnitude of their betrayal. I was done accepting crumbs of concern while they feasted on celebration with the people who had already broken my heart once. It was time to choose myself, permanently and completely. And as I would discover years later, that choice would give me power over their lives that they could never have imagined possible. December 13th arrived with the kind of bitter Chicago cold that cuts through every layer of clothing and settles into your bones. I woke up at 5 a.m. in my empty apartment, knowing that 200 miles away in Indianapolis, my family was probably having breakfast at their hotel, getting ready for what my mother had called the social event of the year, the pre-surgical. Preparation at Northwestern Memorial Hospital was a surreal experience. Janet Rodriguez checked me in with the gentle efficiency of someone who had guided hundreds of patients through this process. But I could see the sadness in her eyes as she processed my paperwork. No emergency contacts listed, no family members in the waiting area, no one to receive updates during the procedure. "Leo," she said quietly, as she attached my hospital bracelet, "I want you to know that our entire surgical team is rooting for you today. Dr. Harrison is one of the best oncologists in the country, and you're going to get through this beautifully." The volunteer companion the hospital had arranged was a retired teacher named Mrs. Patricia Williams, a woman in her 70s who had been sitting with surgery patients for over a decade. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the sort of maternal presence that made you feel safe even when you were terrified. "I've been doing this for a long time, dear," she told me as we waited in the preoperative area. "And I've learned that sometimes the families we choose are stronger than the ones we're born with. You're going to discover reserves of strength you didn't know you had." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I thought about what my family was probably doing at that exact moment. Getting dressed for wedding festivities, taking photos, laughing and celebrating while I went under anesthesia, not knowing if I'd wake up again. The surgery itself was successful. Dr. Harrison removed several lymph nodes from my chest cavity and confirmed that the cancer hadn't spread as extensively as they'd initially feared. When I woke up in recovery, Mrs. Williams was sitting beside my bed, reading quietly while monitoring machines beeped softly around us. "How do you feel, sweetheart?" she asked when she saw my eyes open. "Alone," I answered honestly, and then immediately felt guilty for being so blunt with this kind stranger who had given up her Saturday to sit with me. "That's understandable," she said gently. "But you're not as alone as you think. Sometimes life forces us to discover who we really are when everyone else falls away." It was during recovery that I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. Lying in that hospital bed, watching Mrs. Williams knit while snow fell, outside my window, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could spend the rest of my life trying to win back the love and approval of people who had abandoned me during my darkest hour. I could use this experience as the foundation for building a completely different kind of life. I chose transformation. That evening, while I was still in the hospital recovering from surgery, my phone buzzed with a group text from Emma. It was a photo from Sienna and Jake's wedding reception. My entire family gathered around the happy couple, everyone smiling and laughing in their formal attire. The caption read, "Missing our Leo. Tonight, but celebrating love and new beginnings." Beautiful wedding. The casualness of it, missing our Leo like I was away on vacation instead of recovering from cancer surgery, crystallized everything. I needed to understand about these people who shared my DNA, but clearly didn't share my values. I typed and deleted several responses before settling on something simple and final. "Enjoy your celebration. This is the last time you'll hear from me." Then I blocked all of their numbers, deleted them from social media, and began the process of legally changing my emergency contacts to remove them from any role in my medical decisions. The nurse who checked on me that evening found me crying, but they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of relief, the kind of emotional release that comes when you finally stop fighting a battle you were never going to win and instead choose to fight for yourself. The path forward is going to be hard, I told myself that night, staring at the ceiling tiles of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, but it's going to be mine.
Ow.
I didn't know then that my decision to cut my family out of my life completely would eventually lead me to medical school, to a career in oncology, to becoming the kind of doctor who could save lives that other people had abandoned. I didn't know that 10 years later, I'd be sitting across from Sienna Stewart in my own office, holding her medical fate in my hands. All I knew was that I was done being the person who begged for love from people who treated my life as less important than their social obligations. I was done being Leo Thompson, the graduate student who accepted crumbs of affection from people who should have moved heaven and earth to support him. It was time to become someone else entirely, someone who understood exactly what loyalty meant, because he'd learned the devastating cost of its absence, someone who would never, ever forget the lesson his family had taught him about the difference between people who love you and people who simply tolerate your existence when it's convenient for them. The decade that followed my cancer surgery was a masterclass in rebuilding a life from absolute zero. With no family support system and a limited network of graduate school friends, I had to learn how to create meaning and purpose from pure determination and spite, emotions that turned out to be surprisingly powerful motivators for transformation. My recovery from the surgery took 6 weeks, during which I received exactly 0 calls, texts, or visits from any member of the Thompson family. The silence was initially devastating, but it gradually became liberating. Without their constant drama and emotional manipulation, I discovered reserves of mental energy I'd never known existed. Mrs. Patricia Williams, the volunteer who had sat with me during surgery, became an unexpected mentor during my recovery. She visited me twice a week, bringing homemade soup and stories about the dozens of patients she'd supported over the years. Through her, I learned about the informal network of people in Chicago who dedicated their lives to caring for others during medical crises. Retired nurses, former patients, community volunteers who understood that healing required more than just medical intervention. You know, Leo, she told me during one of our conversations, some of the strongest people I've met were the ones who faced their biggest challenges completely alone. There's something about learning to survive without a safety net that creates a different kind of resilience. Her words planted a seed that would define the next phase of my life. If I could survive cancer and family abandonment at 25, what else might I be capable of achieving? 3 months after my surgery, I made a decision that surprised everyone who knew me, including myself. I was going to abandon my biochemistry PhD and go to medical school instead. Not just any medical school. I was going to become an oncologist, specializing in the exact type of cancer that had nearly killed me. The application process was brutal. Medical schools don't typically accept students who are halfway through graduate programs in unrelated fields. But my personal statement, a carefully crafted narrative about facing cancer alone and discovering my calling to help other patients navigate similar crises, was compelling, enough to get me interviews at several prestigious programs, Northwestern University's medical school. The same institution where I'd been treated offered me acceptance, along with a partial scholarship. Dr. Harrison, my original oncologist, had written one of my recommendation letters and personally advocated for my admission to the program.
Leo.
He told me during a coffee meeting where he explained his support for my career change. In 30 years of practicing oncology, I've never seen a patient handle a family crisis during treatment with such grace and determination. You have an understanding of what cancer patients truly need that most doctors spend decades trying to develop. The next 4 years of medical school were the most challenging and rewarding of my life. I threw myself into studying with an intensity that amazed my classmates, motivated by a crystal-clear vision of the doctor I wanted to become. I wanted to be the physician who never let patients face their diagnoses alone, who understood that healing happened in relationships as much as through medical interventions. During my oncology residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, I developed a reputation for spending extra time with patients who lacked family support. I created protocols for connecting isolated patients with volunteer companion programs. I published research on the psychological impacts of family abandonment during medical crises. My colleagues started calling me the patient whisperer because of my ability to connect with people going through the worst experiences of their lives. After completing my fellowship, I was recruited by Meridian Cancer Center in Austin, Texas, one of the most prestigious oncology practices in the Southwest. Within 5 years, I'd been promoted to department head, overseeing a team of 12 oncologists and revolutionizing their approach to patient care. I built a life in Austin that was everything my existence in Chicago had never been: purposeful, independent, and surrounded by people who shared my values about loyalty and commitment. I married Dr. Amanda Foster, a fellow oncologist who understood my dedication to patients who faced cancer without family support. We had 2 children, Sophie and Michael, who grew up understanding that sometimes the most important work in the world happens when you help people during their darkest hours. For nearly a decade, I'd been Dr. Leo Thompson, the acclaimed oncologist who had transformed his personal trauma into a calling that saved lives. I rarely thought about my family back in Indiana, the graduate student I'd once been, or the life I'd lost when cancer revealed who people really were when tested, until the morning when my secretary, Jennifer, knocked on my office door with a look of concern that immediately put me on alert. "Dr. Thompson," she said carefully, "there's a patient here for a consultation who specifically requested to see you. Her name is Sienna Stewart, and she's been referred for treatment of stage 3 ovarian cancer." The name hit me like a physical blow. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process that the woman who had married my former best friend while I underwent cancer surgery alone was now sitting in my waiting room, needing the expertise I'd developed as a direct result of her betrayal. "Send her in," I said finally, my voice steady, despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. When Sienna walked into my office, she looked exactly as beautiful as she had 10 years ago. But there was a fragility around her eyes that spoke to the terror that comes with a cancer diagnosis. She sat down across from my desk, clearly nervous but hopeful, and began explaining her symptoms and the diagnostic process that had led her to my office. "Dr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying the same musical quality I remembered from our college years, "I've heard wonderful things about your work here. My doctor in Indianapolis said you're one of the best oncologists in the country, especially for cases like mine." She had no idea who I was. The name Leo Thompson meant nothing. To her, just another doctor in a white coat who might be able to save her life. The man she'd abandoned for his wedding celebration had become invisible to her, erased from memory as completely as he'd been erased from her priorities a decade earlier. I listened to her medical history, reviewed her scans, and confirmed what her previous doctors had already told her: she had an aggressive form of ovarian cancer that required immediate and intensive treatment. The kind of treatment that would require a support system, family members who would prioritize her medical needs above everything else in their lives. "Ms. Stewart," I said finally, closing her file and meeting her eyes across my desk, "I've reviewed your case thoroughly, and I'm afraid I have to inform you that we cannot proceed with your treatment at this facility." The color drained from her face exactly as it had in Dr. Harrison's office 10 years ago when I'd confronted her about the job applications to Seattle. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Is it my insurance? Can we work something out?" "It's not about insurance," I said calmly. "What?" "It's about our facility's policy regarding patients who have demonstrated a history of abandoning family members. During medical crises, we found that people who can't provide loyalty during health emergencies typically can't handle the demands of intensive cancer treatment." Her mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "Know what you mean? I've never abandoned anyone during a medical crisis." "Actually, you have," I said, feeling the same sense of calm determination I'd experienced during my surgery recovery. 10 years ago, you chose to celebrate your wedding while someone who loved you faced cancer surgery alone. Today, I'm choosing To prioritize my other patients over someone who has proven they don't understand what loyalty means. Loyalty means. Recognition finally dawned in her eyes, not just of who I was, but of the absolute justice of the moment. The man she'd abandoned during his fight for life had become the doctor who could save hers, and he was choosing not to. Sometimes life's most perfect lessons come disguised as the cruelest ironies. Sometimes the people who teach us what love isn't end up needing what love is from the very people they abandoned. And sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. It's about finally having the power to protect yourself from people who proved they never deserved access to your life in the first place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. This one hit the mark. You won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.